Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? Story 1. We attended a wedding for a family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue, but it was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt on the couple's faces. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in the city?" We lived an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people, but only 30 guests came. They were willing to have strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. And we hadn't handed over a card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Story 2. I'm a wedding photographer. I was at a really fancy one a couple of years ago, a typical outdoor deal at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The place was really nice, had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by all like she was ascending from heaven. So the ceremony begins and the bridal party comes down and takes their places. Then the bride appears with her father. She takes 3 or 4 steps down the concrete steps and her shoe twists on her. She tumbles down a good 12 feet or more and busted out the majority of her front teeth in the fall. With the place being so isolated, it took a good 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive and she was in intense pain. Ultimately, she was okay and I got an email from them weeks later with a rescheduled date. This time, there were no stairs anywhere in sight. Story 3. This one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, the photographer was taking jumping shots of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, etc., but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up her dress and had to sit with her mom in another room while everyone else danced, etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Story 4. I was studying photography and used to act as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. Went to a couple's wedding, he shot digital and I shot black and white film. Spent all day with the couple from 9 a.m. through 2 a.m. the next morning when we left. I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only a day, but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning I got a call from the photographer and his voice was pretty shaky. He explained that the groom had been that night after the reception party. 3 guys had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This story was in South Africa, if that helps explain how or why this happened. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We'd worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she had the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and didn't charge her a penny for the day or all the prints and album. Sort of the least we could do. Because my photos didn't matter as much, I'd been able to simply capture those natural moments between them rather than staged wedding photos. So they had the normal album pics, but also about 150 snaps of them just being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived till we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the woman I'd met only a week earlier. That still haunts me. Story 5. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. And while we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid as fuck. The place was overcrowded, you could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat, that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti, and rolls, not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. Story 6. Not ruined, but married. My ex-wife's grandmother was in her 90s in a wheelchair. While we're up at the altar, she won't shut up about the flowers that might need water. She's not talking quietly to her neighbor. She's yelling in her old lady voice. She didn't have dementia. She was very with it. She had no volume control and what she was doing was inappropriate. She thought the flowers needed water. "They look terrible," she yelled. One of the cousins, without saying anything, got up and started to just wheel her out. "Where are we going?" she yelled. We all got chuckled at Grandma and went on with the ceremony. Let me say that she was a very lovely woman, she just had a loud opinion at the moment. Story 7. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church and then there was a party in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend was one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later, one of the bridesmaids came back asking for help. Some swans attacked the photographer, and the majority of the people around him were not doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. Story 8. Big wedding. Around 500 people. All the future wife's doing, too. She wanted the huge $70,000 wedding. And I was a groomsman. Pre-wedding, he's nervous as hell. All these people have to be perfect. This is her dream wedding, yada, yada, yada. So at some point, the whiskey gets pulled out. It went from a calm the nerves, few shots, so he's just about to finish the bottle. We gave him water, got him in the shower, and redressed. It's going time. Midway through her vows, he pukes all down the front of her dress. It was horrible, but it was great. They're going on 8 years strong. Story 9. It was a big wedding with over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. The worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Story 10. This didn't happen at a wedding, but at a 30th wedding anniversary. I was working as a waiter at an inn. We had ballrooms for private parties and other bigger events. The bride and groom had spared no expense. About 100 guests, 5-course meal, an open bar, a whole day party. We were supposed to close it at 4 in the morning. It was grand and one of the biggest parties I had waited on so far. After the main course, the husband stood up and held a speech, a long one. He started out reminiscing about when they had met, their early life together, the hard times they had endured. He then talked at length about how he loved the children she had birthed them and told each of them how proud he was of them, their character and accomplishments. So far, it was one of the better speeches I had ever heard. It was heartfelt, and he had a lot of charisma. He was well-spoken and funny. But then he turned to his wife again. He told her that he had hated her for the last 4 years of their life together, that she was toxic, narcissistic, and that had made him feel miserable and almost driven him to. He told her that he knew she had a lover, pointed him out in the crowd next to his wife and children. He had evidence and was suing for divorce, intending to take everything. He gave her the divorce papers right then and there. Then he announced to everyone that he had gotten his own apartment, that the movers had all moved his stuff while they were at the party, and that he would be leaving shortly. But everything was already paid for, so they should stay and enjoy themselves. In the stunned silence that ensued, he tipped all the staff, dishwashers, bosses, waiters, and busboys $200 each and left. Needless to say, all except the family had left the party within the hour. Story 11. The bride and groom get shit-faced, got into a fight, crying, yelling, screaming, and running out into the courtyard. The best man goes to check on them, finds them rolling on the ground, not in a sexy way. The best man throws the bride out of the way, slams the groom's head into the sidewalk, and pins him down. The bride starts kicking the groom in the face. The best man pushes her away while sitting on top of the groom. The bride storms off with the bride's maids. The best man lets groom up, who begins kicking and punching trees and breaking the posts off a gazebo, saying, "I'm gonna kill myself." The best man tells the bridesmaids to go grab the police officer from inside for assistance. The police officer comes out and tries to help get the groom to his room. The wedding was at a fancy hotel. The groom proceeds to talk shit and be disrespectful to the officer and ends up getting arrested. The father of the groom disowns him and yells at the bride. The best man and his date ended up taking care of the bride and grooms his child and stayed in their honeymoon suite for the night. I was the best man. Story 12. I went to a coworker's wedding about 15 years ago, and this technically happened at the reception. It was a beautiful outdoor venue overlooking a lake. Anyways, the groom had planned to sing a song to his new wife and have fireworks launch as he was singing the last note. Well, that last note came, but the fireworks didn't. He held that last note for a good 10 seconds before he finally yelled, "Motherfucker!" threw the mic down and ran to go fight the fireworks guy. No fists were thrown, but somebody did end up in the lake. The party kind of broke up after that. Story 13. My dad has vintage and veteran cars. When I was younger, he used to do some weddings with them, and I loved clearing out the confetti from the car when he'd get home. One week, he arrived back and there was no confetti in the car. On the way to the church, the bride changed her mind, and instead of taking her and her father to church, they asked if he could drop them off at the local zoo as it's her favorite place. So he did, left them there in full wedding attire. They were going to get a taxi home and they were done. It was the days before mobile phones too, so I'm guessing people were waiting at the church for quite a while. I called my dad to ask him if he remembered this, and he seemed to think, from what he could overhear, that she was only getting married because she was pregnant and thought she had to. This was the early 80s. He also told me he did 2 weddings where the groom never showed up. Story 14. A fight broke out between the father of the bride, the brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it actually was, more just the dad and brother assaulting some man. So anyway, they were both arrested, cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail. and now face assault charges for what they did to this poor man. Story 15. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine. Why spend a fortune for one day? But I guess the venue thought they could cut some corners, so they stuck us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine some people immediately left. The only drinks were those from a vending machine. It was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off, the ceremony had to be paused because you couldn't hear anything. And the day after the event, every single one of us had food poisoning. Another story, because even though it didn't ruin the wedding for the couple, it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid for my friend. I flew across the world for over 10 hours to be there. I had to do the setup at the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, redo her bouquet because she didn't like it, etc. And the whole time she's rude and tells everyone within earshot that the bridesmaids aren't helping. Her maid of honor was absolutely bending over backward, trying to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful, she told her sister, "I should have asked you to be my maid of honor instead." She was pretty cold to me and kept asking if I'd lost weight. I said yes because I'd been ill but didn't think much of it. At the reception, her new husband takes the opportunity to read the speech she clearly wrote for him to say to me, "We are so glad you fit into your dress," in front of over 100 people. I don't speak to her anymore, and neither does her maid of honor or other bridesmaids. Story 16. The bride and groom decided to go get a few pictures right after the ceremony. They disappeared for about 5 hours. We all waited at the venue. Since no one got any word from them, the buffet wasn't set, and the DJ didn't play any music. After 2 hours, most guests decided to collect some cash, and we talked to the manager of the venue to get out the buffet and the DJ to play music. So we basically started the party without the wedding couple. When they finally came back, they were in shock because basically all the food was gone, people were drunk and happily dancing, and everybody forgot that this was their wedding. So the wedding itself wasn't ruined, but everything around it, well, us guests had a great time after all when we took things into our own hands. Story 17. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone panicked the whole day and thought she had drowned. By the time she did get back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was quickly clear from the sexy content it wasn't her aunt at all. She'd been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after, $60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. Story 18. My best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute, her mom asked me to manage a CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply didn't follow what she was instructing me, but she told me she had confidence in me anyway. Apparently, all her life, she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song, but I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror and amusement of the crowd. For years after when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, he'd say, "Is this the guy who f***ed up my wedding? How are ya?" Story 19. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. My friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. I immediately called my friend and asked what was going on and if this was okay. Turns out my friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, he and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and told them to leave without telling his parents. The parents had a meltdown as we left. Story 20. I worked at a hotel. The groom and maid of honor got caught on the roof. They leave in the limo that was supposed to be for the bride and the groom. The would-be bride was inconsolable and sat in the lobby in her wedding dress and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. Could not be moved or consoled. She just sat there and cried for hours. I'll share a bonus story from a friend of mine who also used to work in hotels. Big wedding, open bar with lots of booze, and most of the attendees, including the wedding party, are apparently gussied up white trash. The ceremony itself goes off without any issues. Reception becomes a big beer and booze-soaked party, and then starts to run late, so the catering manager tells the father of the bride that they've exceeded their time and they need to start shutting down. This leads to an argument involving several members of the wedding party. Blah, blah, blah. Do you know how much I paid? Blah, blah, blah. They eventually comply, but it stirs the inner white trash. The party then spills out to the hotel bar where people keep drinking. Members of the wedding party are still stewing about the reception getting shut down and tempers being short. Finally, something triggers the groom and he takes a swing at someone. He swings back. Groomsmen start swinging. Now it's a full-on Donnybrook. The hotel staff manages to get them out of the bar and the fight spills out the front entrance of the hotel. Police show up and start trying to break things up. The groom at some point takes a swing at a cop and proceeds to get beat up. The bride, who at this point was just standing on the sidelines screaming and talking kick his ass, baby, finally decides, well, I guess we're doing this, and walks up to a female cop and takes a swing at her. She chose the wrong female cop because this woman was apparently way more yoked than she appeared and takes the bride to the ground. By this point, the police wagon shows up. Several people are handcuffed and loaded up, including the bride and the groom, and they're all hauled off to jail. Story 21. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, and red wine spilled on wedding dresses. A lot. The one I'll never forget, an all-day small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every type of food you could imagine, and a free bar, all in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but only 30 guests turned up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful, converted barn, loads of food and drinks, great music, but no guests. At about 10 p.m., the venue was licensed until 11 p.m., the buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent, as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response was, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming." It was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life, and no more guests showed up. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance at about 10:30 p.m., and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were actually there. It's the only event I have ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, the bride's parents paid for the whole day, and the happy couple had zero control over their own guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates, not friends, they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a shit about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was just basically a networking event for the bride's parents.